Untitled Podcast is a part of the Kansas Google Education Group Network and also the Mace Kansas Network. You can find more information about episodes and guests at www.untitledpc.net. Welcome to Untitled Podcast. My name is Travis True.
And I'm Carol Nelson. Welcome to this episode of the Untitled Podcast. Today we have Lori Rice. She is a fourth grade teacher at West Elementary in Wamego, Kansas, who has taught K through 2 reading as well as kindergarten, first grade, and fourth grade since 1996. She has a passion for creativity, learning, questioning, and the whole child. This year, she is teaching remote fourth grade and organized the elementary remote program for her district. Lori is a published author, KCSS Teacher of the Year, Region 2 K-Toy semi-finalist, and has received many grants for education. Her classroom is a place of acceptance and celebrating differences. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome, Lori. And she's also a board member for Mace. Need to mention that too. So, Lori, we're just here. We just want to hear your story, and that's what we're here for. So if you want to share with everybody who's listening just your journey through education and teaching and kind of how you ended up in Wamego.
I was actually born in Manhattan, Kansas, and moved to Wamego when I was 2. So this has been my lifelong home. I love the small community. I love the small town feeling, and it was important for me to be involved in that, especially as I decided to have children. So I went to Kansas State University, have always had a passion for learning, have always been curious, and always loved reading. So going to K-State, it was a natural fit for me to go into education. I got my degree in elementary as well as early childhood. My beginning passion was very much for the preschool, kindergarten age. I've transitioned, however, over my teaching career of 20 plus years and have ended up in fourth grade and been there for the past 12 years and really enjoy the older students as well as I did the younger students.
That's great. Now, when we hear the term remote learning these days, our ears tend to perk up. So how is the remote learning program in Wamego organized? What makes it successful as well?
We've been implementing this for a semester now. It was something that I developed over the summer with some help of my colleagues and much support from my administration. We structured our program by looking at some things that had been occurring in the spring process across the United States and took the approach that we were transitioning our students to a new learning environment, and therefore we had to have new learning ideas in place with that. So we have structured social emotional right from the beginning. That is how we open our days, is with that social emotional piece so that students are able to connect. And we talk about so many of those social emotional pieces that are important, especially during a pandemic, but just in education and life in general. We are doing math for about an hour and a half in the mornings. We transition into social studies and science for about a half an hour. And then we have built-in time where the students are off of the cameras and off of the Zoom meetings, and they have independent work time that involves tasks they've been given. I also created a website so that they can have free choice of things for those students that are done with an activity. They can go onto the website and they can find things that fit their needs. And those things range from reading to mathematics to cooking to art to music. Really looking at the whole child was an important piece for us. Our special teachers were super supportive, and they are getting on once a week with our remote classes and doing some activities and touching base with them and still keeping them so that they're in the loop of our entire school system and part of our school. And then in the afternoons, we cover reading and writing. So our students are on remote learning for a big chunk of time, but it never feels like it because we ebb and we flow and we work and we talk and we play. they have independent time where they check off and kind of go do their own thing, and then they come back. And it's been a very, very successful approach, I think, because we thought about the needs of our families and we were very supportive in giving them the pieces they need. So they have iPads, they have keyboards, and once a month we do pickup. So my kids at the end of December picked up a huge kit of science supplies and STEM supplies and math supplies, so that they're not just using computer programs, they're using manipulatives, they're using real books, they're using those tools. And I think that's also part of what's been making it very successful.
So with the remote, are you just teaching fourth grade, or what grades do you have?
I am strictly teaching fourth grade. We had about 50 in my building, which is 3 through 5, that parents selected they wanted remote learning. We have had a few ebb and flow with that throughout the first semester. We had a few that decided they needed to go back to a brick and mortar school for various reasons. And we had a few that decided they wanted to move on to remote learning for various reasons. And so, but with that shift, we have about 50 in grades 3 through 5. And I work really well with my team. We have a third grade teacher and a fifth grade teacher. And it's been great to have their support and their ideas and their resources. Then we have one teacher doing the lower elementary, K through 2. They did not have near as many families want to participate at that age level. So that system, it's designed very similar to ours, but they're not on Zoom as long. They do more smaller group throughout the day so that the students aren't on as long, because it doesn't make sense for them to be involved that way.
So when you're in a traditional classroom before COVID, one of the things all teachers try to do is they try to do some bring in some community members, do some community building types of things. So have you been able to do that while you're in remote?
It's actually so much easier with remote because people can be available. They don't have to factor in the transition time or the work time. Oftentimes they don't have to necessarily take off from work. They can build it into their meeting schedule and pop in for a half an hour. And so we've really been able to do a lot of interesting outreach things in our community that I wouldn't have been able to do, as well as our travel piece. We have had visits to museums that I never would have loaded 20 children up on a bus and driven for 2 hours to a museum, but we can do that because we pop in, we're at the museum for an hour, and then we're back out. So really it has really opened up our world even more, I think, to the community.
Yeah, the virtual field trip has boomed since since April, because that was one thing that every virtual field trip or zoo that was having something, we had a document, and anytime we found something, we put it on there, and that document became several pages long.
I'm sure. It's really been fun to see the businesses step up to opening their, doors, their expertise to students and to teachers. I think that's been a really fun part of this.
How have you been able to find those community connections? Has the community itself reached out? Did you reach out? Is it a combination of both? How are you tapping into that and building that?
It's definitely a combination of both. I have a fantastic network of rock star teachers that I follow on Twitter. Some of them are designing these things across the state. And so I always just piggyback off of them and follow what they're doing. The Manhattan Zoo reached out to me and said, hey, here's something we offer. And with fourth grade standards for science, it fits right in with what we're doing for living systems. So that was a fun connection. I'm constantly looking for ways to pull things into our classroom. Also have connected with K-State. And so while we don't have block students as traditionally, we've been able to do some STEM activities with K-State students that are learning about the education program. And so all of those pieces have really built into allowing my students to have some spectacular opportunities and experiences over the past semester.
How are you with your remote kids? How are you doing differentiation now?
We probably, I would say, the same way I'm doing it in my classroom, except I feel like I know my kids even better. I don't feel like they can be wallflowers. I feel like I know exactly where they are. My groups ebb and flow the same way they do in the classroom, except probably even more so because I'm doing a formative assessment and then making my notes and pulling a small group. We use breakout rooms all the time. I use volunteers. I use my K-State students. I've got support from paraeducators. And so I'm constantly looking at the skills that we've done and doing mini lessons, probably even more than I would have in the classroom. And that's been a really exciting piece of it as well. We still do small group reading discussions. As I mentioned, accessing both physical chapter books as well as online resources. And so the students get that discussion for, vocabulary and for reading. I was able to do a really fun project where we invited in our Board of Education because the students were writing persuasive essays and they created the perfect school. And then they had to sell their school to the school board. And I had many members of the school board pop into Zoom. And again, that was such an available opportunity because they could pop on when it was convenient. And so they came in. Some of them were there for the whole hour. Some of them were there for the 20 minutes they could be there, but they went into a breakout room and they talked with students. And so that piece for writing, they never get that piece of individualism and of getting to talk with someone. And we talk about the real world sharing for writing, but this was legit the real world sharing for writing. And because then the school board members voted and we had a school that was supported that a student in my classroom had designed. So, dreaming is fun. And it was really fun to see that with them.
So what kind of things are you doing? Because so with we're recording this in the middle of winter break, and hopefully everybody is having a great break. I know I am. We've been actually forced on a break. We've been in quarantine. Today's our last day in quarantine, so we kind of had a forced break there. But anyway, how are you dealing with students and the social emotional aspect of your classes, and just kind of take us through how you're dealing with some of that remotely?
Again, I feel like I know my students better this year than I ever have. I get to see into their home lives, which has been very eye-opening, and empathizing with that and just sharing Legos and pets and Christmas trees and traditions. I know my kids that eat. They're in the kitchen, mom's bringing soup, and it's so much fun to see that and to have that personal connection with them, as well as sharing my home with them. And they get to see my porch when I go outside to do science experiments. They get to, see where I am, and they saw my Christmas tree. And it's been really, I think, bonding for us to share those things. We do spend the first 30 minutes of our day in that social emotional piece. When they get on, I have something for them to interact with. This past 9 weeks, it's been word searches. And so they do word searches together, and that's all that's up. And it provides conversation. We did holiday word searches. So we talked about different traditions, and the student knows someone who celebrates Hanukkah. And so, I had a Hanukkah puzzle up, and that sparks that conversation just naturally between them and among them. And that's been huge. We've watched a lot of videos about, just the skills that they need, because remote learning is hard stuff. I'm asking them to do things that we ask adults to do. And I know that, and I recognize that, and I speak with them about that. But we also talk about what an opportunity it is for them to organize themselves, and for them to be responsible, and for them to become leaders, and for them to own and observe their weaknesses and their strengths, and to help each other through that and with that. And I think they're doing a spectacular job of that. So that piece builds into all of our social emotional support. And I feel like we truly are a huge community. I can recognize my kids by their voices, which is something I've never done before. But if I have a student that's just speaking and I'm on another slide, or they're on a different page from me and I don't see them, I know who's talking. So I think that speaks volumes for the connections we have, and they can do it for each other as well. And I think that's just been a really interesting community piece from what we've done in our remote classroom.
Great. So as we wrap up here, the last thing, and we ask this to everybody because it's always interesting to hear the answers to this question is, what is something that you're doing now as a remote teacher that you will take back with you when you transition back into the classroom?
I think the biggest takeaway, and I've been processing this for a semester now as I've observed and built our community and made adjustments to what works for us. But I think my biggest takeaway is to slow down. When I have my students, I have to really finally decide what's the most important piece of this. What do I need them to know? What do I want them to know? Why are we doing this? So everything we do is done with purpose. And that is something I definitely want to take back into the classroom, because as a classroom teacher in a traditional setting, I constantly felt the pressure of the time to get to the next thing, to do the next thing, to move down the checklist. And it feels different this way because a lot of the peripheral things have fallen and we're doing what's important. We're doing what's led by children. We are having great conversations and we're learning so very much that I want to transition that when I go back. I don't want to go back to the checklist. I don't want to go back to the push. I want to focus on what's important and why are we really truly doing this, and to be doing it because it's fun.
Yeah. Well, Lori, thank you very much for coming on and sharing with us what you're doing. Where you're on Twitter and you're very active, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Miss L. Rice. I do have a Facebook page. That one's probably not as active, but I do have a classroom Facebook page. Twitter is my primary resource for networking with teachers, though.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, Lori, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody who's listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
See ya.